The lighthouse that never went dark. I should have listened to the old fishermen when they warned me about accepting the lighthouse keeper position on Riven Island. That place ain't been right for a long time, one of them muttered, puffing on a pipe. Not since before my grandfather's day. But I was too bullheaded and ambitious at 26 years old to heed the ramblings of superstitious salts. The job paid well and came with a nice cottage right on the New England shoreline. After being cooped up, working some dead-end desk job, getting paid to live and work in one of the most beautiful and remote parts of the coast felt like a dream. The nightmares began. My first week, the lighthouse stood an impressive 70 feet tall, proud and white, with its blue steel trimming. A winding staircase inside the cylindrical tower led up to the aerial observation deck and the light itself, a powerful lamp putting out over 1 million candelas. My duties were simple enough: keep the lens clean, ensure the backup generators had fuel, refill the reservoir that supplied the light with kerosene, perform routine maintenance, and monitor the weather systems coming in off the Atlantic. By day, it was a pleasant, if somewhat lonely, existence. Riven Island was little more than a single rocky mount, barely a mile across, only accessible by boat. Other than the lighthouse compound itself, with its cluster of buildings and the ancient, crumbling foundations of some long-forgotten settlement, it was utterly deserted. I spent my mornings tending to my duties, my afternoons hiking along the windswept cliffs and beaches, and my evenings cooking dinners for one, while watching the lighthouse's powerful beams sweep across the murky waters. Then night would fall, and the hellish visions would begin. The first time, I awoke paralyzed with an unearthly sense of dread, unable to move or cry out. My bedroom was pitch black, but in the infinite blackness, I could make out two pale, luminous orbs hovering in the air. Piercing and hateful, they seemed to bore into my very soul, filling me with abject terror. I don't know how long they remained there, burning into my mind, before whatever nightmare spell had taken hold broke and I could finally scream. After that, the visions grew progressively more disturbing. Grotesque, shambling figures lurking at the periphery of my sight whenever I passed by darkened doorways or looked too long into shadow. A distant, abyssal roar that reverberated through the walls at night, shaking the foundations. Half-formed faces, pressing outward from the very woodwork, twisted in anguish. Always, there were those two unholy eyes, staring at me, first with hatred and then expectation. I tried every folk ritual, every superstitious practice sailors swear by, to ward off evil spirits. I slept with the lights on, left offertories of rum and tobacco by the lighthouse's door, even went so far as to have the island's grounds blessed by a passerby priest from the mainland. Nothing worked. The visions only grew more terrifying, more palpable. Dark shapes began pelting themselves against my mirror until it cracked into a twisted grin. The floorboards started whispering horrible, blasphemous secrets in voices that sounded like they were being torn apart. Terrible, wet sounds began emanating from the very walls themselves, as if the island's ancient stones were slowly digesting something unholy. And always, those eyes remained, now accompanied by the silhouette of some immense, inhuman shape, glowering from the darkness, observing me with dread purpose. I dreaded falling asleep. To surrender to hallucinations and terrors turned the realm of dreams into a vision of hell itself. Finally, after 3 months of this unrelenting supernatural torment, I reached my breaking point. It was mid-September, when the visions and phenomena took a malevolent, undeniable turn into the realms of the terrifyingly real. I had been making my routine inspection of the lighthouse tower, taking stock of the fuel levels and checking for any structural issues, when I noticed a thin tendril of black smoke winding up the spiral stairs ahead of me. Trying to remain calm, I quickly ascended towards the light room, wondering if there was an electrical fire or gas leak. What I found, when I reached the top, however, nearly caused me to faint dead away. The reinforced glass of the giant Fresnel lens had cracked and shattered in one section, like a fist had punched through it from the inside. And sprawled across the still-turning, grinding gears of the light mechanism was a thing. A twisted, charred mass of limbs and tormented faces, molded together into a single, horrific amalgamation of seared flesh and anguish. Veiny, inhuman arms twitched and flailed, as the being seemed to struggle hopelessly against being crushed by the rotation of the lighting apparatus. When it saw me, its multitude of melted, distorted visages all opened in a single, deafening scream of pure torment and hatred that bored directly into my skull. Covering my ears in horror, I backpedaled away, slipping and tumbling back down the stairs in a panic. When I finally regained my senses, sprawled on the ground outside, I realized the lighthouse was still rotating, its powerful beam still sweeping across the island and ocean every 12 seconds. Even with that thing crushed upon its machinery, the light had not stopped operating. A trail of thick, almost oily smoke was pouring out of the tower now, carrying with it the stench of smoldering hair and charred meat. I fled the lighthouse in pure terror, making a break for the docks, where I kept a small motorboat, steps from tearing open the tender flesh of my feet, on the jagged rocks underfoot. My mind was paralyzed with confusion and horror, unable to rationalize what I had seen. It was only blind animal instinct, forcing my legs to run, to escape this accursed place at all costs. When I reached the docks and untied my boat, something caught my eye, a thick, red crust, fouling the underside of the wooden planks. I reached down to touch it with a trembling hand, but retched, when my prodding broke the caked, filthy surface, to reveal a bed of thousands of oozing boils and pustules, like the sort that erupt on a leper's flesh. The entire dock seemed to share this grotesque, pus-laden underbelly, which now began bubbling and weeping putrid, briny ichor, up between the planks at my feet. With a scream of revulsion, I leapt into the rocking boat and frantically started the engine, temporarily forgetting about raising the outboard in my panic. I lurched away from the dock in reverse, angling out into the deeper waters of the small cove, as the twisted wooden slips disappeared behind me. That was when I caught sight of the lighthouse tower again, in my peripheral vision. The glare of the beam cut across me, blinding and brilliant. But just for an instant, after each rotation, I caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness behind the tower, a hulking, colossal shadow shifting against the rocks of the hillside, like the shuddering breath of some eternal, slumbering behemoth. To this day, I do not know how I managed to raise the engine and flee that godforsaken place, careening wildly over the black, choppy swells as lightning forked across the sky. The image of that profane amalgamation, crushed within the lighthouse's inner workings, and the immensity of the presence I sensed lurking behind its light, has been seared into my mind's eye forever. I made my way to the mainland town, in a half-catatonic state, pounding on doors until someone finally took me in and contacted the authorities. A search party was assembled and returned to Riven Island to investigate. But they found absolutely no signs of anything amiss, beyond the lighthouse being firmly shut down. Only a few broken planks on the dilapidated docks remained, as any slight evidence that what I experienced was not a mere fever dream. Of course, I immediately resigned from my position and tried to put that harrowing experience behind me. But it has haunted me every night since, in the form of